Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Sonal Lala. Joining us over the next few days are members of the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform. We are joined with former House Speaker, Mr. Nizam Mohammed, and economist, Dr. Terrance Farrell. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We have a lot to talk about in terms of constitutional reform. I understand this goes back to all the way to 1974. There's been 6 calls for it since then. Tell us what's different this time around and what can we expect?
Well, I think if you go back, I mean, we can go back further back than that if you want, up to pre-independence. But since 1974, so we had the Wooding Commission in 1974. That led to the 1976 Constitution. And then very shortly thereafter, actually, in 87, we had the Hayat-Ali Commission, which was initiated under the NAR regime. Then we had the Principles of Fairness draft constitution. In 2006, we had the Ellis-Clark draft constitution under the Manning administration. And then we had the Ramadan Committee report in 2013. So this is, in fact, the 5th iteration of an attempt at constitutional reform since the 1976 Constitution. What's different about it this time? Well, let me just say that it's very interesting. I don't think many people know or understand this. At this very moment in the Caribbean region, there are 5 attempts at constitutional reform going on. In Belize, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Trinidad and Tobago, and in Guyana. All these countries, all of these former British colonies that gained independence in the 1960s and 1970s are all now, at this juncture, seeking to reform their constitutions. And I think it's a very interesting development because I think it is telling us that something is fundamentally wrong with the constitutions that we had, that the constitutions that we have inherited from the British are no longer working effectively for us. What's going to be different this time? I think that the difference this time will have to be the involvement of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed more broadly the people of the Caribbean, getting involved in the process of making reform happen on this occasion.
The committee would have held, several discussions, public consultations with this. Do you think, as you said, the public is involved this time around?
Well, what has happened is that we have attempted to reach out to as many people as possible, and we have had attempts. We have gone throughout the country, and we have had public meetings. We have had private meetings. We have consulted with private individuals who are specialists in their own fields, in the field of law, in the field of sociology, and so on. So that we have made an attempt to reach out as many people as possible during our time of consultation. And we've got all the figures reflected in our report with respect to the advances that we have made in terms of sensitizing the public and getting the public interested in this exercise, which we are again attempting for the 5th time, as my friend has said. And we feel that we are getting some traction.
As you discussed, we said we had this trying for about the 5th or 6th time. Can you outline the process this time around and how the project is going so far, and how did we get to this point?
Well, I think if you look back, and I sort of keep taking you back to the Wooding Commission in 1974. But when they did their report in 1972-74, they went all around the country, just like we did. I think they had about 40-something meetings around the country. But at that time, remember, there was no email, there was no social media. We had one television station, we had 2 radio stations in 1970s. Today, and what was different about this committee is that we have 30-something radio stations, we have social media, we have email, we have all these ways of reaching the public. And this is what our committee took advantage of. We took advantage of the fact that today, with modern information and communications technology, you can reach people where they are. And this is what we did. So we were able to get over 800 submissions coming in via email to the committee. In addition to that, we had the town hall meetings. The town hall meetings didn't have a lot of attendance, but taken together, we had over 300 people attending the town hall meetings. And then in addition to that, we focused on the youth. So we constructed 3 youth forums together with the Trinidad and the Tobago Youth Councils, at which we engaged young people on the question of the Constitution. So from our perspective, we think that we have reached and we have got submissions and recommendations from a large number of people, which we think are quite representative. Let me just say, Sunil, that there are some people out there who think that in order for your outreach to be valid with a population of 1.3, 1.5 million people, an electorate of 1.1 million, that you need to talk to hundreds of thousands of people. That is absolutely not true. In order to get a view of the people on issues, on any issue, whether it is constitutional reform, quite frankly, you only need to talk to a few hundred people to be able to get an idea as to what the population is thinking. We got over 800 email submissions. In addition to that, we got a number of recommendations coming from the town hall meetings and from the youth forums.
A political party would have recently held their special convention where we saw their own constitutional reform committee. And I think it's important to make a distinction, whether there's a distinction between their own constitutional reform committee and the National Advisory Committee for Constitutional Reform.
I think that was a very positive thing, because the political parties ought to be involved in an exercise like this, because the political parties actually advocate, or they go out there and they indicate to the public that they are looking after the interests of the public, and there can be no more urgent interest to be looked after at this particular time in the Caribbean, as my friend has said, Dr. Farrell has said, than constitutional reform. And it has been a burning issue, and it appears as if what we have inherited from the colonial times, now the time has come for us to make that change and to be ourselves. And you would look at what we've got there in our report. The very name of the report, the title of the report is "We the People." But I want to come back to the fact, to the point that you have raised. I think it is a very healthy thing. If political parties do not get involved, then how would we know what they stand for? And they are the ones who will be offering themselves to the public for the public's support. And we the people, we want to know what these political parties want and what they don't want. That will help us to make an intelligent assessment. And as I say, whether it be a political party or a member of the trade union movement or the church for that matter, we the people, we've got to come together, and now we have gotten to that stage. And I think the political party that had its convention and had its own presentation of its own report and so on is perhaps something that we should ask ourselves, whether or not other organizations in the country across the board should not become involved. At the end of the day, what we want to achieve is this, that we produce a constitution from material and information that the people have given to us. Surely those who are in authority, they are the ones to facilitate the process. But we on the ground, for that matter, we are the ones who have to make this move, and it is the first time in the history of our country, the way we have developed, that we are taking this step, deliberate step, to alert the public that it is the public that has the responsibility for producing a constitution. And we want it to be a people's constitution. We want this constitution, we want the people to claim ownership of the constitution. And that is why that title, you will hear me saying it more than once, we the people. We the people must produce a constitution for us the people. And that is why I say it was a most welcoming thing that a political party, and all political, we may say that what happened to the political party was politicking, but isn't that what political parties are there for? Every day they are politicking. So we want them to get involved in this exercise as everybody else should get involved.
You know, Mr. Mohammed, at that convention, the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, he would have made a call for the opposition to become involved in the process and so on. He said there's a reluctance from the opposition to become involved in this reform committee, constitutional reform and so on. As the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform, can you allay any of the fears that the opposition may have in terms of whether you are an independent body looking to reform the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I think the answer to that question really has to do with the fact that the exercise is initiated by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and we must be very careful about terms like, so there's the government and there's the opposition. Those are state organizations. The opposition is a state organization. Political parties are not part of the state. There are several political parties in the country. In fact, if you look to the EBC, they will tell you there are many political parties who are registered. The opposition is recognized in the Constitution, as, of course, the government is recognized in the Constitution. The government, of course, has to take the initiative in terms of doing an exercise like this. Somebody has to fund it. The critical thing is that you identify people who are independent, and we think that we are, of political parties and so on and so forth, to carry out that exercise and to do it in a way that can withstand scrutiny in terms of the independence and the thoroughness and the comprehensiveness with which we do that task. And we think that we have done that. We think that we have delivered a report which, and a set of recommendations which reflect what the people have been saying to us, but also reflect a certain set of issues and considerations which have, quite frankly, bedeviled the British Constitution that we've had since 1962. Let me just give you one example of that. One example is the Section 6 of our Constitution, which is the Savings Clause. What the Savings Clause did originally with the 1962 and the 1976 Constitution is that it said all previous legislation had been passed under as a colony, that legislation was saved. Now, saving the legislation was a good thing in the sense that you don't have to, with the new parliament, independent parliament, have to go and redo all of that legislation. But it went further. It said that if that legislation had provisions which breached any one of the rights in the Constitution, you couldn't challenge it. So here you had a constitution which is supposed to be the supreme law of the country, but you then had ordinary legislation passed by the British colonial government that was in some sense superior to your constitution. Doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. The Savings Law Clause, therefore, can't survive in a sovereign democratic state. And so therefore there are issues like that which obviously have to be dealt with. And unfortunately, the 1976 Constitution, the Republican Constitution, which we now have, kept the Savings Law Clause. And it therefore kept all those old pieces of legislation, for example, the sedition legislation dealing with public health, legislation dealing with public order, legislation dealing with things like sexual activity among people of the same sex and so on. All those old pieces of legislation were grandfathered by our Constitution and in fact became higher than our Constitution, which is supposed to be the supreme law. That can't stand. So the political parties have a responsibility, we think, as important actors within our polity. And it's not just the PNM and the UNC, but there are many other political parties who are aspiring to become elected and to become the government, that there's an opportunity now that our report and recommendations coming from the people and coming from the experts that we've consulted and so on, that now these political parties have an opportunity to look at what has been recommended and to make their own input into that. The idea being that the process is not finished. We have a conference, or as I like to call it, a convention or a constituent assembly, which is to come later on this year. And that's an opportunity where political parties and all other stakeholders, the trade union movement, the business community, civil society organizations, people with a strong interest in issues around the environment and so on, can come to that conference and have their voices heard in terms of what they would like to see in the Constitution.
You mentioned, you asked about our independence as an advisory committee. And that is exactly what we were, or what we are. We were asked by the government that we should advise the government on the convening of this national conference that is to come by the end of the year. And we were to go out there and obtain information and find out from the people what the people want. We were not asked to write a new constitution or a revised constitution. What in that exercise could be partisan? We have done everything in the public glare. We have made everything that we have done so far public. So there is nothing that can indicate that we are partisan in any way. And again, any accusation in that regard will be another form of politicking, and that's what it is. Yes. But, as I say, it enlivens the discussion. And as we go along, people will change positions, and hopefully we will have a kind of consensus where through which the population will realize that the reconstruction of our present constitution is going to the basis of all the problems that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And a revised constitution will be the foundation for addressing all of these problems that we are experiencing, whether they are social problems, whether they are economic problems, whatever they may be, the constitution, a constitution coming out of this exercise will provide the country with the provisions of the law that will help us, one, to respect the law, to observe the law, and more than that, for us to understand our role in ensuring that policies of whichever government, we have a role to play and we are counted as belonging, we the people. Yeah. It is time that Trinidad and Tobago understands that when a constitution is in force in Trinidad and Tobago, that it belongs to the people, and it is the people who have produced such a constitution. And if we get the opportunity between now and the convention that we are anticipating, we want to explain to the country how power works. And we want to let them know that in detail. And we want to let them know through reasoned arguments that politicians are the servants of the people and they are there to serve the people and they owe the people an obligation and they have to make adjustments. But you see, you also have political parties, and it is natural and it is normal for political parties to want to maintain the status quo because they want to guard what is in their best interests. And that is what the politics is all about.
As we said before, and our viewers would now know, we've had several calls for this constitutional reform since 1974. That was even before, long before I was born.
Yes.
Not trying to give away my age, but in terms of how confident is the committee, because this has been going on since 1974, 5 or 6 times.
Yes.
How confident is the committee that we can see this happen this time around and that we can actually see constitutional reform in our lifetime?
Well, that's a difficult question for us to answer. I mean, our job as a committee, quite frankly, is to do what we have done so far, which is to produce a report which reflects a lot of the recommendations which have come from the people through the mechanisms that we've talked about. So in a way, the people have spoken. They have said a certain set of things. What is very interesting is that the things that they have said are very consistent with what they said back in 1974, what they said back in 2006, what they said in 2009, what they said in 2013. So we feel that the perspectives that we have put forward in our report have been vindicated, that the people have been saying this for the last 50 years, that we want to have proportional representation, we want to have a fixed date for elections, we want to have the right of recall, all of those things that are top of the list of what came out of the process that we had. The other point that we make is that we want to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that we have agency. We are not subjects of a British monarch. We are citizens of a republic. What does that mean? It means that we have agency. We have control. We are the ones who put the parliamentarians there. We are the ones who put the Prime Minister and the ministers into office. We are the ones who do that. We put them there, as Nizam was saying, to serve us, to develop policies and to implement policies which are in our best interest. And therefore, the responsibility and the power of the people to say to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, to say to the parliamentarians, to say to the politicians, this constitution which we are operating, we want to change it. These are the things that we now want to put in place.
As the late Lloyd Best, many years ago, would remind us from time to time, even then, he would tell us, it is time for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to take up
your
their
beds and walk. Take up your beds and walk.
And my view is, he was telling us that then, and it was relevant then, as it is as relevant today. You have asked the question as to why you think these previous attempts have failed. My observation is that this particular effort can succeed and has all the chances of success, and I will tell you why. One element was missing with respect to the previous attempts, and that is they did not go sufficiently far. They produced their reports, they produced draft constitutions, whatever. What they did not have was the backing of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And they did not have the backing of the people of Trinidad and Tobago because they did not solicit the coming together of the people and asking the people, leave your political preferences behind. Come together as one people. Make it a carnival of intellect. We come together when it is mass time and carnival time, and everybody feels as one. Let us feel as one in this particular exercise, but this time it is not old mass, it is the challenge of the intellect, the collective intellectual capacity of Trinidad and Tobago, and we do not want to scare people out there. We want them to talk, and they talk plenty sense. I'm telling you, we have discovered that. The people have the capacity, they know what they want. And I want to let them know that people like Dr. Farrell and I, we will not be the ones who are writing the Constitution. That is for certain technically trained people. All we want is the people's thoughts and the people's support, and we want them to know that this is an ongoing exercise that will take us some time, but we've got to get together and just leave the divisive politics aside, and we should come together as a people and show that we have the capacity to govern our affairs, to handle our affairs, to manage our affairs in Trinidad and Tobago.
Dr. Farrell, it can be argued that, people know about some of their rights, their right to vote, their right to a fair trial. Do you think they're aware of their rights when it comes to constitutional reform, or do you think they even care?
But I think the thing is, Sunil, that people do care, but you see, most of the population, people are about their daily business. People they're working, they're busy, and so on. The other thing is that people say that people don't know the Constitution. That is true, I think, in a very sort of technical sense. And if you ask somebody what does Section 54 say, they wouldn't know. Or what does Section 6 say, the Savings Clause, they wouldn't know. But people grow up in a system. You grow up in a system where, for example, you know that there are elections every 5 years. Yes, there are elections every 5 years, and that you have a right to vote in those elections. That's part of the Constitution. It's in the Constitution. People know, for example, that the Prime Minister and the ministers are put into something called the Cabinet, and that they come out of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Everybody knows that, because some ministers are senator this and some ministers are, right? People know it. That's in the Constitution. Now, if you said, is that in the Constitution? They say, well, no, I don't know where to find that in the Constitution. But they know the system, particularly the electoral system. They also know and they also understand the judicial system, because many people experience the judicial system. If you have a problem, where do you go? You go to court. You go to the magistrate's court, or you go to high court. People know that there's a high court. People know that there's a court of appeal. They read the newspapers and they see these things in the newspapers. And that's part of the Constitution. So one of the things that we said is that people actually do know some things about the Constitution. What they may not know is they may not have asked themselves the question, is the way in which these institutions are structured the best possible way? And so what we've tried to do is to remind them that in many instances, the structures that we have, the institutions that we have, were put in place by the British, believe it or not. For example, most Trinidadians would complain about the efficiency and the effectiveness of the public service. Most Trinidadians don't realize that the structure of the public service was put in place by the British in the 1950s. We took it, we put it into the 1962 Constitution, we left it in place in the 1976 Constitution, and it continues to function that way up to today in 2024. And then we ask ourselves, well, why is it the public service is not working? Why is it that, we ask ourselves, why is it the judicial system, for example, there are these delays? We provided some data in our report about people in the remand yard. Some people are in the remand yard for 5 years, 7 years, 9 years. People are on remand, they can't get bail, and they stay in those conditions for that period of time. Why is that? Is there an alternative? What can be done to improve the system of justice in the country? That's what constitutional reform is about. So once people begin to understand that change is possible, change can be made, once people can see what some alternatives are, then people are going to be interested. For example, we would say to you, Sunil, that the problem of crime in Trinidad and Tobago today is a constitutional problem. The problem of the potholes that we have in our roads, in all sections of our communities, is a constitutional problem. Why do we say that? We say that because ultimately, when the judicial system is not working, when the public service is not working, When local government is not fixing your roads or collecting your garbage, it means that somebody is not doing their job, and somebody therefore is not being held accountable for doing their job. We also go on to say that where should that accountability start? The accountability is not going to start with the guy who's supposed to be actually picking up your garbage or fixing the pothole or repairing the leak in the road. The accountability has to start at the top. Because if the people at the top of the system, of the power system, are held accountable, then they will ensure that that accountability rolls all the way down the line, from the Commissioner of Police, from the Police Service Commission, to the Commissioner of Police, the Deputy Commissioner, all the way down to the Constable, who is then going to be held accountable for what he does or what he does not do, or what she does or what she does not do. That's the context.
Join us tomorrow evening as we continue our discussion on constitutional reform. I am Sanolala. On behalf of the entire group, have a great night.